How you doing, everyone? Today I would love to talk with you about how to prioritize requirements effectively as a business analyst. Out there are many different techniques to prioritize requirements, and today I want to show you one very specific one I used a lot of times now in my current job. And this technique is trying to do this prioritization process quite objectively with 4 criteria. So what are these 4 criteria that help you prioritizing your requirements? The first thing is the business value of this exact requirement. This means how much assets is this going to bring in, or in other terms, how much monetary value does this requirement or this feature, whatever it is, hold in itself. I will give you examples later, but for now let's keep it like this. The next factor is the risk reduction, meaning if you would not implement this feature or this requirement at all, what risk will we face? The higher the risk, the more value the requirement holds in itself. Then we have time criticality. This is similar to risk reduction, but also put on the timeline. So this means if we do not develop this requirement within the next X months, let's say 3 or 6 months, what is going to happen, or what is going to be the risk of not doing it? So there's a timely aspect. With later some examples, it will be more easy to understand. And then there's the 4th component, which is the complexity. So we try to make everything into a relation to understand how complex this feature is too. So what are these 4 columns now, and what are possible examples? So you could imagine there is a feature which is, let's say you have to with a new feature, you can onboard some new partners on your application that bring assets to your company, right? And based on how many assets this partner could bring, the business value of this requirement is different. So if you use this requirement and a lot of partners come in with a lot of assets, then the business value might be higher. But if this is just one single partner who has not a lot of assets, then the business value of this requirement would definitely be lower. I usually like to estimate here also in business value and all these other criteria with story points in the sense of the Fibonacci sequence. So 1 to 13, for example, just to put everything into perspective. These numbers don't exactly mean the business value of 1 means 1 million or whatever. It just put things into perspective. So let's say we have the first requirement, it has a business value of 5. Then the next thing is the risk reduction, meaning if you do not implement it, what is going to happen? Are we going to lose a partner fully? Is nothing going to happen actually? And that's the thing to estimate too. So if you know your partner really wants this feature and is maybe partnering up with another bank or financial institution and you do not deliver this requirement, then the risk reduction might be pretty high. Let's say a 13, this is the maximum we can go. This really means, okay, if we don't do this, we're going to mess up big time. But if you also think on the other way, well, actually our partner could accept not getting this feature at all, it's like a nice to have, then maybe it's lower, like a 1 or a 2. Then time criticality. A good example to think about this is always, let's say, the soccer World Cup. Let's say it's going to happen in 6 months, and we are about to produce the balls to play the game. And the question is, the time criticality is pretty high, because if we do not deliver in time the balls that we created, for the next year or the next World Cup, they will be worthless, because this design is very specific to this year, and also maybe the year is also written on the ball itself, right? So the time criticality is super high, because if you do not make it in time, it's like worthless, right? This is a timely component. Maybe your partner has a certain due date during the year where they present their stuff, and if you cannot deliver to this date, the next year you don't need to do it anyway. So that's the time criticality aspect. How urgent is it seriously? And then the complexity, also in story points. How complex is this topic? Maybe you have already the experience to understand how many steps are involved, how many people are involved, how much money and budget is involved to estimate 2 requirements which is other. So let's say this one requirement is super easy to implement. It just takes like, I don't know, a couple of sprints or maybe 1 sprint. But this other requirement is something super big, so you have to split it across multiple sprints or even multiple releases, which makes it higher. And now if you take all these 4 numbers and you build a certain quotient, so let's say you sum up the business value, you you sum up the risk reduction and the time criticality. This gives you a good understanding how valuable this is. And if you put this into a relation with the story points, then you also know how much value do you get per complexity, so the bang for the buck. And then you can put all your requirements in this scheme, and then you understand easy, okay, what is a low-hanging fruit? Which requirement is a low-hanging fruit? And which requirement is maybe too much work for the actual value? And this gives you an objective way to prioritize requirements. This is something I did on my own solely, but also what is a very good technique is also to bring this to other stakeholders, to also bring their intelligence into the discussion, because maybe you as a person alone, maybe you underestimate a certain factor, let's say the business value, but another person would value it differently because they have different information than you do, right? So if you bring multiple people together with various understandings, you can be a smarter group than just being on your own. But yeah, if you do this all with your requirements, you will have a list which requirement is the more important. So the requirement with the higher prioritization factor is more important, right? If the higher business value, higher risk reduction, high time criticality divided by a low story point amount of complexity, this is a big win, right? This is something you need to pursue first because there's the most value to get for a very reasonable amount of time. And of course, you have to stay away from requirements which need a lot of time to implement, a lot of work, but the value and the risk reduction and time criticality is not given. Also, I think you should be careful about time criticality because in my experience, a lot of stakeholders, they estimate risk reduction and time criticality is super high, like everything is a 13, which is obviously not the case. So you always have to make sure if you estimate one, put the other requirement you have also in relation. Like don't do this isolated because then everything seems to be a 13. But the goal really is that the most of these stories or requirements should not have the same rating, ideally. Because if you're honest to yourself, it's sometimes still easy to spot which of these two has more of a risk reduction, which of these two is harder, right? People tend to often put everything on the same level, like everything a 13 or whatever. But be challenging. Like if you have two with an 8, two with a 13, challenge them. Like guys, do you really think these two requirements here are really the same in terms of business value or risk reduction or time criticality, or is there still a slight difference? And if there is, then you can change the numbers, and then again you have other pairs which have the same number, and then you can ask again, do you really think that is the same in terms of complexity, for example? And after refining this list multiple times, you really get a good list of what is more priority, what is less priority, what is medium priority. And yeah, this exercise is something really you need to experience a bit, work through. In the beginning, like I said, everything will be high priority as always, but this gives you a good guideline to stay a bit more objective. And what you can do afterwards, like let's say you have this list, then again you can make a plausibility check. So you go over this list and say to yourself or all to the stakeholders, do you agree that this list reflects reality? So let's say there are certain topics, then are grouped by the prioritization factor, the higher the better. And of course, let's say if there's something super easy to make, so let's say low story points and medium value and all these things, it might be pretty high on the list because it's so easy to implement, like a low-hanging fruit. But it makes sense still to challenge this, like do you also see this as a low-hanging fruit? Because this is the priority list we're gonna go through. And then maybe you realize you underestimated something or you overestimated something. People say, to me it doesn't make sense that this requirement here at the bottom is so down here, it should be more up. And then you can rediscuss and re-estimate maybe some underlying requirements are just not put into perspective here. But this list gives you a good starting point how to prioritize requirements more objectively, and I hope this will help you out in your job as a business analyst.